Thank you, Pradeep. This is actually Robert Lavery. Stefan will be doing the presentation of the Sage Intacct software. I'm going to be doing a quick overview of the key functionality of the Orchid EFT processing for Sage Intacct. And welcome again, everyone, to this webinar. We appreciate your time today. EFT processing for Sage Intacct is a tool that allows you to streamline your payment process and accounts payable, your AR direct debit process, and within a few weeks, the employee expense reimbursement process within Sage Intacct. What we want to do today is tell you a little bit about Orchid systems, and then more specifically about the Orchid EFT processing solution. Stefan will be conducting a live demonstration, and then there'll be time for a few questions at the conclusion of this presentation. But first, a little bit about Orchid systems. They've been selling Sage-based products for over 30 years now. There are over 6,000 Sage customer sites using Orchid solutions in over 80 countries. We work with over 450 Sage business partners, with Fast Business Solutions being one of those key business partners. Orchid is located in Sydney, Australia, but sells all around the world. Our organization works as their North American distributors, so we work with these business partners and customers in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Orchid has won multiple industry awards, both from Sage as well as other well-known industry leaders. They have a portfolio of over 16 integrated modules, primarily for Sage 300, but now EFT processing for Sage Intacct. And interestingly, customers who purchase one Orchid module generally come back and buy at least one more. So our average over the 6,000 plus sites is 2 modules per site. Orchid has a tremendous track record of excellent product support. As you can see from the graph on the left-hand side, 23% of support tickets are responded to within 1 hour, and close to 2/3 or 3/4 of those support tickets are responded to within 8 hours, and almost 90% within 24 hours. And that's why you see the graph on the right-hand side with constant revenue growth averaging 23% year on year over the past 17 years. More specifically about EFT processing, we have over 5,000 Sage customers running this software, again, in over 80 countries. One of the keys to success of this application is that we've been able to develop over the last 17 years over 850 shared maps that allow you to process different kinds of payments with different banks and financial institutions around the world. And so even though EFT processing for Sage Intacct was launched last November 2022 into the Intacct marketplace, you have the comfort of knowing that these mapped functions for different payment types have been in use for over 17 years in our global customer base. EFT file creation for both AP payments and AR direct debits is managed based on the formats required by your bank. We always ask customers to get what's called the specification document from your bank, which allows us to map those key fields to a file type that you can then install into the software. In most cases, we already have a compatible file format. But if you send us a specification that we don't have a compatible file format for, we create a new one at no charge to you. And these are fully integrated into the common Sage Intacct payment process routines. As you'll see as part of the demonstration, we're not changing anything about the way you enter AP invoices or set up your AP payments with approvals. Once you have a posted payment batch, that's when you can introduce EFT processing to generate the file for electronic payments. And as we've already mentioned, there are hundreds of bank formats supported across Canada, the United States, and around the world that support specific geographic requirements, such as NACHA in the US, the CPA 005 in Canada, and so on. We also support user-definable formats. So if you have some very specialized requirements, which recently we've been doing for Wells Fargo in the US, we can customize these formats to match any type of payment for any type of bank. The system will allow you to set up these files against your AP vendors and EFT banks so that all this information is held securely within the Sage Intacct database. And once we've introduced these file formats into the Intacct environment, it will customize the screens that you see within EFT so that all of the user-definable screen labels that are required to support that EFT file format would be reflected in the specific bank terminology that's part of that EFT file. We also have extensive security features, such as audit logs and user security, to maintain control over the transactions that are created, plus monitoring and auditing any changes to the banking details. We use industry-leading WebAssembly technology, which allows us to embed the functionality of EFT processing directly within the Sage Intacct instance, as it's called. And this is an important security measure as well. Because we're running on the same database in the same Intacct instance, none of the information used to process these electronic payments or direct debits is being transferred to a third-party server. So all of that information is secured and only processed on the Sage Intacct instance. It's developed in the Sage Intacct SDK, or software development kit, so it provides a very familiar screen interface that you'll be familiar with, which makes the learning curve very small. And as I've already mentioned, all of the information will be embedded and stored within your Sage Intacct database. So let's take a look at what those screens look like before we show you a live demonstration. This is how the Orchid EFT module looks when it's first installed within Sage Intacct. And this is where you set up your EFT file list, your EFT banks, and other formats that may be required. Once you've set up the invoice and the payment process, you make an EFT AP payment request, which then matches the file type against the vendor and bank with a posted payment within Intacct. And then you will see a list of those EFT files that you can choose and make the payment. It's really that simple. We thought we would show you a flow chart just to give you a quick schematic view of the process. And this information will be available after the webinar today on the BAS website. So we start off, as we said, entering, posting, approving your payments, and any advance payments. You then select within EFT AP payment requests which payments you would like to include within your EFT file. You then generate the file, which then is downloaded onto the Sage Intacct server. Once that file has been downloaded, you then have the option to import or upload that file into your bank's website. The bank will confirm if that process was successful. However, it is also possible to put these files on hold if you need to make any changes to the banking or vendor information. When you do that, you'll be notified that you can amend the EFT bank and vendor details. Once those amendments have been made, you'll be able to refresh the file and re-download an updated file, and the history is maintained within Sage Intacct. So now, let's take a live look at Sage Intacct utilizing the Orchid EFT processing solution. Stefan?
Thank you, Robert. All right, so just before we get started, there are two key things I want you all to take away from this demonstration. Is, as Robert said, both AP and AR are very similar in the process. So the first, or 2 of 3 steps for AP and AR are very similar, where you set up the appropriate formats as well as the banks. And the only difference is that for APs, you are setting up a vendor, which means you yourself are sending money to your bank. Whereas for AR, you're setting up a customer because you are collecting money from your customer. And so, without further ado, I'll just exit out of this slideshow here, and we will get started. All right, so first and foremost, as you can see here, this is just a short list of the different formats that are available on Intacct, and those are listed under Orchid, EFT, EFT formats, and so forth. Same thing with EFT banks. And actually, just before or that, for Canadian payments, which is going to be what we do primarily for this demonstration today, Canadian payments, you use this CAN_CPA 005 EFT format. Whereas if you're doing a lot of American payments, NACHA is the format to use for making those payments. And so now we'll transfer over to EFT banks. And again, a short list. And something to note for Canadian payments, the bank name and format that you use is this 400_CHK-CAN_CPA 005. And that's for Canadian payments. For American payments, we use 100_CHK-NACHA. And so now, this is how we go about setting up our vendor. Vendors are located in accounts payable, and we click vendors. And so I'm just going to pull up a vendor that I've created so that you can see what it looks like when you do have it set up. So we click view, and this is the most important thing to note about when you are setting up your vendor. And that would be Orchid EFT, which is here. So the important thing to note is having the appropriate EFT format, the name that's going to be on your account, the account number, name of your bank, as well as the financial institution, transit number, and your payment reference, which all of those will be provided by your bank when you get yourself set up and registered on Intacct. And once you've done that, you're now ready to set up bills and payments. So now, under accounts payable, the way we set up bills is we click bills. And since we obviously don't have a bill anywhere listed here, we will click add. And so I'll just put in my vendor very quickly. And once you've done this multiple times, you'll be able to just populate from your last bill. And an important thing to note is of these payments, make sure that your bill number is at least 6 digits. So I'm just going to go ahead right here and just change the amount. And once everything is good, as well as your transaction and base currency, along with the date that you need to make of your payment, you click Post and New. And so as you can see, that record was created successfully. And so now, where do we find this record? We find it in Bills. And so what we do then is we click Add. Oh, no, sorry, not right there. We go to actually Pay Bills. And so here, we put in our payment method, record transfer, select the bank, which is 400 CHK, and we make sure that we have the appropriate bill currency, which for this will be Canadian. And so what you can see here, this payment that I just created appears at the very top up when listed. And so now, same thing as you'll see when we generate this payment later, this button here when I click on it, it allows me to either pay all of these at once, or just for the purposes of today, I'm just going to pay this one. And so once I've selected the appropriate one, I click Pay Now. Oh yes, of course. Selecting the appropriate bank, which is 400 CHK. And so now we click Pay Now. And I'll just save that. And so that payment that I just paid is now ready to be generated as an EFT file. So now, going back to Orchid EFT, we go to EFT AP payment request. And so the same thing for making payments. I can either generate all of these files listed here, or just generate this one and only that I'm about to do. So I click Generate. And as you can see, you'll get a notice popping up saying that a file has been generated. And from here, that file will go directly into your EFT file list under Orchid EFT. And so you will see at the very top, it has this status new because this file has just been generated. And so now, if you notice on the far left here, we have two options. We can view the file, which I'll show you what that looks like. We can download it. And then the far right can hold the file, refresh the file, or delete, which will be explained shortly. So this is what your file will look like when we click View. And this is just an overall of everything that you've just created, from the payment amount, as well as the account number, and vice versa. And so once everything looks good, what we then do is we click Download. And so just as a template here, your downloaded file will appear as a coded template that is immediately downloaded to your computer's browser, which, as you can see, appears as a coded template right here. And so now, if you notice, the status of your file has now been exported because we downloaded it. And so then we click Confirm. And so as Robin mentioned earlier, supposing you clicked Confirm, but your bank rejected it because you either added an invalid payment due date or an invalid payment amount. So here, this is where we put the file on hold. And so the status will then change from exported to on hold. And so what the great thing is, when we put the file on hold, we just go in, make our changes without having to create a completely new bill from scratch. And so once we've made those changes, we click refresh. And obviously this is popping up because I haven't made any changes to this. And so that is what you do for AP payments. So now we go over to AR. And so as I mentioned, AR is completely the same, only the only difference is we go under to accounts receivable, and for setting up customers, we click on invoices. And it's the same thing. Once you have your customers set up, we then go ahead and we click Add. And so I'm just going to go ahead and include my customer name, populate from last invoice, which you'll be able to do to make life easier once you've done it multiple times. And I will just quickly change the amount right here and just make sure that everything looks good. And once you've done all that, we click Post and New. And so this payment that we just created a record for, staying under accounts receivable, we then go to Receive Payments New. And because that payment that we just made a record for will not be found and listed here, we go ahead and we click Add. And so the same same process as an AP, only this time we make sure we fill in the name of our customer, what the payment method is, which is a record transfer, the account, which is 400 CHK. And so then we can click Show Invoices. And as you can see, this new payment that I created appears at the top here. And the same idea as AP, we can either select all of these, or just for the purpose of this demo, we click this one here, we add it. So then I'm going to cancel this right here. And so since everything here looks good, we then click Post and New. Usually what will happen is it'll be created successfully. And once that has been done, we go to Orchid EFT, and same as AP, only we click EFT AR payment requests. And that is pretty much how you go about with creating and generating both AP payments and AR direct debits. And so now we will resume this slideshow, and I will pass the mic back over to Rob to take us home.
Great, thank you, Stefan. Now you may have noticed in the live demonstration that Stefan was processing these transactions at the top level. That just gives you the indication that you can process EFT processing payments or AR direct debits for multiple entities at the same time if you're processing these transactions at the top level. You can also, of course, do that at the entity level if you're processing payments or direct debits one company at a time. So just to review the key features, the vendor payments include advance payments. There's over 850 different file formats supported, and this includes domestic and international wires, check payments, positive pay, Interact email bulk payments. And there's also support for SFTP, which is Secure File Transfer Protocol. And that just means that instead of downloading the file to the Intacct server, you can download it to an SFTP server and upload it automatically to your bank's website. So that would be a one-step process instead of a two-step process. There are user-definable EFT file formats, and the key difference here between what Intacct offers versus what Orchid EFT enhances is that Orchid EFT will support multiple file formats per bank account, whereas Intacct only supports one format per bank account. In the future, we'll be adding user-definable remittance advices. We do have remittance advices, which allow you to email remittance notifications to your vendors, as well as direct debit notices to your customers. And we're looking at adding, excuse me, some additional security features and audit reports. Most notably, a two-step process where someone can enter a new EFT vendor, and then someone else can go in and approve that vendor for EFT payment processing purposes, and likewise for AR customer direct debits. You've seen both AP payments and AR direct debits today, and in a couple of weeks, we'll be releasing the employee expenses for reimbursement of employees. There are a number of resources available through the Orchid website that you can access without a login ID and password. You'll be able to access product brochures, user guide, as well as video overviews and training videos to help you get a deeper understanding of the benefits of the EFT processing for Sage Intacct. And at this point, we've completed the formal part of our presentation webinar today. We have about 5 minutes left. So if there are any questions, we will check the chat box here for anyone who's posted questions, and we'll address those for you now. So I see first question here is, how does EFT processing support multiple currency transactions? Okay, very good. As you know, Intacct is a fully multi-currency based ERP solution. And so you can make payments in EFT in any currency that you support within Sage Intacct. The only issue to note here is that you're only allowed one currency per EFT file type. And that's a restriction that the banks put on the files that are being used to process electronic payments or electronic debits. So you just need to note that you need a transaction currency for payments and direct debits, but it will support any currency that you have in the system. And Orchid EFT will look at your currency table to pick up the correct currency and symbol for those payments. So that was a great question. Thank you. We have another question here. What are the key differences between Sage Intacct's EFT functionality and what Orchid's solution offers? Basically, it was the multiple formats per bank. That's one of the key differences. So it gives you much more flexibility in terms of your payment types. So you could support positive pay, regular EFT, or other types of payment formats like wires in the same bank account, depending on who you're paying and when you're paying them. The other thing would be just the fact that Orchid has over 850 different file types for banks all around the world, whereas Intacct has primarily US-based formats. Orchid EFT, being a global product, supports formats in Canada and around the world. And they have many, many different formats. And what we're finding too is that these formats are becoming a lot more complicated because of additional security routines that banks are putting on their EFT payments. There's a lot of concern about fraud, especially with international wire payments these days. So the banks are adding additional security elements to these files all the time, and we have to keep pace by updating our EFT formats. Next question here is, can you please explain how the SFTP feature works if we want to automatically upload EFT files to our bank's website? Okay, great question. So what I mentioned was that SFTP is actually a third-party server. The Secure File Transfer Protocol cannot be supported in a user's browser because browsers don't support Secure File Transfer Protocol routines, or SFTP. And because EFT processing is running within Sage Intacct in the browser itself, we can't add SFTP as a function within Orchid EFT processing. So what you need to do is you can get a third-party SFTP solution that runs outside the browser, but allows you to set up an SFTP server where you can use that program to map a drive in Windows Explorer if you're using Windows, or it's also available with the Mac operating system if you're using a Mac. And then this allows you to set up a mapped drive to your SFTP server. And that's where your EFT file is downloaded to based on the browser configuration. So one little tip here is that generally what you would want to do is to set up different browser profiles, one to download to your SFTP mapped drive, and then one for general downloads that protects the integrity of the EFT files that you're moving down to the SFTP mapped drive. We do have documentation on this process, and I'm sure Bass Business, who've installed this solution many times, would also be able to assist with that as needed. So at this point, our 30 minutes is done. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. We appreciate your attendance. And if you do have any other additional questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to your Bass Business Account Manager. Thanks very much.
And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, folks.